Stand in the center of your garden on a blistering July afternoon and listen closely. Beneath the hum of the cicadas and the distant roar of suburban traffic, there is a silent, invisible hemorrhaging occurring right at your feet. You are witnessing a crime scene where the victim is your water supply and the perpetrator is the very industry that promised to save you. We have been sold a lie, wrapped in glossy packaging and sold at hardware stores for $40 a pop. Look at the modern irrigation aisle, rows of plastic timers, miles of polyethylene drip lines, Wi-Fi-enabled smart valves, and high-pressure sprinkler heads. It is a technological cathedral built to worship a fundamental flaw: surface watering. Every time you turn on that sprinkler or set that drip timer, you are fighting a losing battle against thermodynamics. Consider the sheer absurdity of the standard protocol. We spray water into the air, atomizing it into a fine mist that begins to evaporate before it even touches the mulch. We flood the surface of the soil, hoping gravity pulls it down fast enough to beat the sun, yet often watching it pool and run off, carrying precious topsoil into the gutter. The United States Environmental Protection Agency admits that up to 50% of water used for outdoor irrigation is wasted due to wind, evaporation, and inefficient delivery methods. 50%. Imagine buying 2 gallons of gas and pouring one directly onto the pavement. Yet, this is the accepted standard. Why? Because the evaporation model is profitable. If the water vanishes, you must buy more. If the plastic lines crack under UV radiation, you must buy more. You have been engineered into a cycle of consumption, tethered to a hose like a hospital patient, to an IV drip, anxiously watching the leaves droop the moment you step away. But what if I told you that 4,000 years ago, before the invention of the electric pump or the PVC pipe, farmers in the most arid regions of China and North Africa were growing lush crops with a fraction of the water we squander today? They didn't fight the sun. They bypassed it entirely. They didn't force water onto the plant. They let the plant call for the water. We are about to dig up a ghost, a piece of low-tech genius that the petrochemical giants have effectively buried under a mountain of plastic waste. To find the antidote to this modern absurdity, we must strip away the arrogance of the Silicon Valley mindset and travel back to the Western Han Dynasty, specifically to the late 1st century BC. While we were busy reinventing the wheel with sensors and solenoids, humanity had already solved the irrigation problem 2,000 years ago. The answer lies in the fragmentary remains of an ancient agricultural manual known as the Fan Shengqi Shu. Fan Shengqi was not merely a farmer. He was a high-ranking advisory official who understood that water was a strategic resource, not a commodity to be wasted. In 18 chapters, he laid out a blueprint for survival in arid climates. But one technique stands out with startling relevance: the use of buried earthen vessels for irrigation. This is the forgotten pioneer of agricultural technology. The concept is disarmingly simple, yet it predates and outperforms our complex networks of pumps and pipes. Fan described burying clay jars filled with water near the roots of crops, a technique that would later be recognized globally under the Spanish term olla, pronounced olla. This is not primitive folklore. It is empirical science that has been validated by millennia of harvest. When you look at the data, the comparison between this ancient method and modern surface irrigation is humiliating for the modern engineer. Contemporary field studies utilizing the olla method have consistently demonstrated a water efficiency rate that is 50% to 70% higher than standard drip irrigation systems. Let that sink in. We are talking about saving more than half the water currently dumped on our crops. While a sprinkler system loses up to 40% of its payload to evaporation before it even penetrates the soil, and drip lines frequently clog or degrade, the buried clay vessel operates at nearly 100% efficiency. Every drop of water inside the vessel is delivered directly to the target zone. There is no surface runoff. There is no evaporation because the water never sees the sun. It is a system that creates a subterranean reservoir, mimicking the natural water table, yet it requires zero electricity and zero pressure. We had the perfect, self-regulating machine in our hands 20 centuries ago, recorded in black and white by Fan Shengqi, and we traded it for plastic tubing that cracks after 3 summers. The question is no longer, does it work? The history books and the harvest yields of the ancients prove it does. The terrifying question is, why did we stop using it? If the physics are sound and the history is proven, we arrive at the uncomfortable question that usually gets you laughed out of a university agronomy lecture. Why is this technology virtually extinct in the modern West? The answer does not lie in horticulture, but in economics. The disappearance of the olla is not a failure of function. It is a casualty of the post-war industrial boom. Following World War II, the global machine was awash in excess production capacity for synthetic rubber and plastics. The petrochemical giants needed a new market, and they found it in the American backyard. They didn't just sell us garden hoses. They sold us a philosophy of convenience that was actually a masterclass in planned obsolescence. Consider the business model of a plastic drip irrigation system. It relies on polyethylene tubing, plastic emitters, pressure regulators, and digital timers. Each of these components has a finite lifespan. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun makes the plastic brittle within a few seasons. Hard water clogs the emitters. Freeze-thaw cycles crack the manifolds. This fragility is a feature, not a bug. It guarantees a recurring revenue stream for the manufacturer. Every spring, you are back at the store, wallet in hand, replacing the advanced technology that failed you. Now contrast this with a low-fire terracotta vessel buried underground. It is immune to UV radiation. It does not clog because it weeps water at a molecular level. Unless you take a shovel and physically smash it, it can last for generations. There is no recurring revenue in a product that never breaks. There is no stock price growth in a solution that requires only local clay and a fire. The olla was erased from the consumer consciousness because it was too efficient to be profitable. We were steered away from the autonomy of physics and herded toward the dependency of the supply chain. We traded a permanent infrastructure for a disposable one, convinced by slick marketing that new meant better, while the truly advanced technology lay buried in the dust of history, waiting for us to realize we had been conned. Let's strip the mysticism from this method immediately. There is no magic spell cast over the garden. There is only the brutal efficiency of physics. What we are dealing with here is a phenomenon known as matrix potential, a concept that explains how this system operates as a fully autonomous, sensor-free computer. To understand it, you must stop thinking about water as a liquid you pour and start thinking about it as a force-seeking equilibrium. The unglazed terracotta vessel is not merely a container. It is a semi-permeable membrane. When you bury it and fill it with water, you are setting up a standoff between two physical forces. Inside the pot, you have hydrostatic pressure, the weight of the water pushing outward against the clay walls. Outside the pot, you have the soil. This is where the invisible science takes over. Dry soil possesses a high soil moisture tension, or suction. In physics terms, it has a negative matrix potential. It is chemically thirsty. The dry earth exerts a physical pull on the water molecules, trapped inside the porous clay, drawing them through the microscopic capillaries of the wall and into the soil matrix via capillary action. Here is the genius of the design. The system is self-regulating. It possesses a feedback loop that no electronic sensor can match. As the soil surrounding the pot becomes moist, its matrix potential drops. The suction force decreases. Once the soil reaches field capacity, the point where it is perfectly hydrated, the tension equalizes with the water inside the pot. The flow stops. Instantly. There are no valves to close, no solenoids to click shut. The water simply sits there, preserved inside the vessel, until the plants drink the soil dry, or the sun evaporates the moisture in the ground, causing the tension to rise and the flow to restart. While modern irrigation operates on positive pressure, forcing water out whether the plant needs it or not, this system operates on negative pressure. It only releases water when the laws of thermodynamics demand it. It is the only irrigation system in existence that physically cannot overwater a plant. Do not make the mistake of thinking you can simply walk into a garden center, buy a glazed flower pot, bury it, and expect a miracle. You would be burying a coffin, not a life support system. To replicate the genius of Fan Sheng-Chi, we must engineer the vessel with the precision of a filter manufacturer. The secret lies not in the shape of the pot, but in the microscopic architecture of its walls. We are looking for a specific state of matter known as bisque, or low-fire terracotta, a state where the clay is hard enough to survive underground, but porous enough to sweat. This requires a very specific firing protocol that modern industrial ceramics often avoid in favor of high-gloss durability. We need to target a firing temperature between 800 degrees Celsius and 900 degrees Celsius, approximately 1,470 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,650 degrees Fahrenheit. If you go higher, approaching 1,000 degrees Celsius or beyond, the silica in the clay begins to melt and fuse, a process called vitrification. A vitrified pot is glass. It is waterproof, and for our purposes, it is useless. We need the clay particles to bond just enough to hold their shape, while leaving a vast, labyrinthine network of microscopic capillaries open between them. This is the perfect membrane. It creates a hydraulic conductivity that is slow enough to prevent the water from simply draining away, yet fast enough to keep up with the transpiration rate of a thirsty tomato plant in August. Crucially, this pore size, measured in microns, is the ultimate security system against root intrusion. In a drip irrigation line, roots will sense the moisture source, invade the emitter, and clog the system within a season. It is a biological inevitability. But with a properly fired olla, the pores are physically too small for even the finest root hairs to penetrate. The roots can sense the water. They can embrace the vessel. They can drink from the surface, but they cannot breach the fortress. We have effectively created a selective barrier that allows water molecules to leave, but forbids biological matter from entering. It is a filtration system that never needs changing, a membrane that self-cleans through the simple physics of pressure differentials. Now we move from the laboratory of the mind to the reality of the soil. Excavation is not a brute force act, it is a surgical insertion. When you deploy this system, you are not merely planting a pot. You are installing a hydraulic engine into the Earth's crust. The rule of engagement is absolute contact. Dig a hole roughly 3 times the width of the vessel, deep enough so that the neck of the olla protrudes exactly 2 inches above the surface. This exposed neck is your interface, the only part of the system that will ever see the sun, and it must be capped to prevent evaporation and debris entry. But the critical engineering happens below the surface. As you backfill the hole, do not simply shovel dirt loosely around the clay. You must pack the soil against the vessel walls with deliberate force. We are trying to eliminate the enemy of capillary action, air. An air gap is a disconnect in the hydraulic chain. It breaks the tension that pulls the water out. If the soil does not physically embrace the clay, the physics of matrix potential fails and the system stalls. You need a seamless continuum from the water inside, through the porous wall, and directly into the soil matrix. Once buried, fill the vessel to the brim immediately. This is the priming phase. You are shocking the dry soil with a sudden availability of moisture, initiating the formation of the moisture plume. Picture a subterranean bulb, an invisible sphere of dampness that radiates outward and downward from the clay, ignoring the surface completely. This is the target zone. You are not watering the weeds on the surface. You are creating a sanctuary in the dark, cool earth where the roots actually live. Now we witness the biological intelligence of the plant itself, a phenomenon that exposes the fundamental stupidity of surface irrigation. When you water from above, you are training your plants to be weak. You are creating lazy root syndrome. By saturating the top few inches of soil, you encourage the roots to cluster near the surface, seeking the easiest meal. This leaves them vulnerable to scorching heat, wind shear, and rapid evaporation. You have engineered a dependency. The moment you miss a watering, the surface dries and the roots panic. But when you bury the water source, you trigger a primal mechanism encoded in the plant's DNA, hydrotropism. Hydrotropism is the directional growth of roots in response to a moisture gradient. It is a biological hunt. The plant senses the increasing humidity in the soil air towards the buried vessel and directs its cellular elongation downwards and inwards. It ignores the dry, baking surface and drives its energy into the cool, stable depths. This changes the entire architecture of the plant. Instead of a shallow, fragile mat of roots, you develop a deep, structural anchor. But the true marvel occurs when the roots finally make contact with the clay. This is where thigmotropism, the response to physical touch, combines with hydrotropism to create a symbiotic embrace. Dig up an olla after a single growing season, and you will see something that looks like an alien organ. The roots do not merely touch the pot, they envelop it. They weave a dense, intricate basket around the terracotta, pressing their root hairs directly against the micropores of the ceramic. This is the hydraulic handshake. The plant is no longer scavenging for water in the soil. It is drinking directly from the reservoir. The efficiency transfer here is absolute. There is no transit loss. There is no competition with weeds, because the weeds on the surface are starving while the crop below is feasting. This dense root ball also acts as a physical insulator for the pot, further reducing any minute evaporation. By forcing the plant to work for its water, you have unwittingly created a drought-proof organism, anchored by a root system that is physically robust and hydrologically independent of the weather report. We have established the supremacy of the single vessel, but we are not here to act as water boys for our vegetables. We are engineers of autonomy, and manual labor is the enemy of scale. To transform a garden from a collection of thirsty individuals into a unified, self-regulating organism, we must invoke the law of communicating vessels. This is where we abandon the watering can and build the gravity grid. By connecting the neck of every buried olla with a simple supply line and linking them to a central reservoir, a rain barrel, or a drum elevated slightly above the soil line, we create a hydraulic communion that defies the logic of modern irrigation. This is the systemic integration. In a standard pressurized system, you need complex zoning, solenoid valves, and controllers to ensure every row gets water. In the gravity grid, physics does the accounting for you. Because water seeks its own level, the entire network acts as a single body of water. When a thirsty pepper plant in the far corner of the garden draws moisture from its olla, the water level in that specific pot drops. Instantly, gravity forces water from the central reservoir to rush through the lines and equalize the pressure. The system balances itself in real time. There are no pumps humming in the background, no electricity meters spinning. The energy cost is zero because the potential energy was harvested when you filled the tank. You have effectively turned your entire farm into a single, massive circulatory system, where the heart is a rain barrel and the veins are buried deep underground, pulsing silently in response to the transpiration of the leaves. You fill one tank once a week, and the physics of equilibrium waters the entire landscape. We have arrived at the final truth, and it has nothing to do with horticulture. It is about sovereignty. The olla is not just a clay pot. It is a declaration of independence from a system designed to keep you tethered to the meter. Every time you bury a vessel, you are severing a microscopic umbilical cord that binds you to the industrial complex. You are choosing the silence of physics over the noise of pumps. You are choosing the resilience of the earth over the fragility of plastic. The modern garden has become a loud, anxious place, filled with the hiss of sprayers and the clicking of timers, a constant reminder of our desperate attempt to impose our will on nature. But the autonomous garden is silent. It works in the dark, governed by the eternal laws of thermodynamics, indifferent to the failures of the electrical grid or the fluctuations of the water bill. Look at your land. Is it a life support patient, hooked up to tubes and sensors, gasping for moisture the moment the technology fails? Or is it a fortress? The blueprint to liberate your soil has been under your feet for 2,000 years. It does not require a software update. It does not require a subscription. It requires only earth, water, and the will to dig. The choice is terrifyingly simple. You can continue to be a consumer, buying temporary solutions for permanent problems, patching leaks in a system designed to fail. Or you can become an architect of autonomy. The drought is coming. The prices are rising. The plastic is cracking. The only question remaining is, when the water stops flowing from the tap, will your garden die, or will it already be drinking from the deep?